Hi, I have been asked to share how I cut 5-inch charm squares and 3-inch squares, which is what I used for the blocks for this Scrappy Pinwheel quilt behind me on the wall. I'll link in the description box the video that demos those blocks and how I put that quilt together. But today I just want to share with you how you can cut the 5-inch charm squares and how you can cut the 3-inch squares, both from fabric as well as from fat quarters. My name is Lori Dickman. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel, Quilting with Lori. If you like what I share with you on this video, please make sure that you hit the like and the subscribe. And now let's get started. I want to share with you how to go ahead and cut this. Okay, let's just do a quick review on the block. This is the block that is used in the Scrappy Pinwheel. There are simply 4 5-inch charm squares, and then each of the 4 charm squares requires 1 3-inch square, which is cut on both diagonals to create 4 triangles. And then each of these little triangles are placed in the corner, and I simply did an edge stitch. As you can see here, just a simple raw edge stitch around each of those triangles. It leaves, that's the bias there, and it's going to leave a little bit of raggedness when you wash and dry it, which is going to give it a nice soft, neat texture. And so that's how I put these together, along with 1.5-inch strips. There are 2 5-inch and then a 10.5-inch strip. I had a lot of this left over and wanted to use it, so I did sash each of the blocks. You don't have to sash the blocks, but I did because I had a number of that to use up. So here are some fabrics that I'm going to use to demonstrate how to cut the 5-inch squares and 3-inch squares. I've got a fat quarter here, and I also have some yardage. This is some Wyndham fabric. I'm not sure who made this fabric. The Selvedges don't include the name on it. So, but I'm just going to cut these up here in a moment. But first, what you need to do is press everything. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board and get it all pressed properly, and then I'll bring it back and I'll show you how I'm going to cut the 5-inch charms and the 3-inch squares. So the first piece of fabric that I'm going to show you how to cut the 5-inch charms and the 3-inch squares on is a fat quarter. A fat quarter is simply a piece of fabric that's 18 inches by about 21 to 22 inches. And so I'm going to, first of all, get this squared up. And I am using my mat to lay this on an edge there, and we're going to square up one side of this piece of fabric, and then I'm going to flip it over so that I can cut on the right hand side. And I'm using an OmniGrid. It's a 6 by 12 inch ruler, and I am going to place that 5-inch line on the edge, and that will give me a 5-inch strip from this fat quarter. I'm making sure that this edge down here on the fold is very square, as well as this one, and so that indicates that my fabric is squared up for me. Cut this here. So we have one 5-inch strip that is cut, and now what I'm going to do is subcut that 5-inch strip, and I'm going to subcut it into 5-inch squares. Let me bring it down here farther so you can see it. I need to square up this end, and I'm simply making sure that the edge lines up on that marking there and down here and across this line here. I've squared it up, and now I'm going to flip it over so I can make cuts on my right hand side here. Again, I'm lining up the marking here on the edge and on the top. It's perfectly even with that line on the ruler, and it's perfectly even with this line on the ruler, so we know that this is squared, and this is 5 inches right here. So I'm going to cut, and then I can bring it back. Oops, I missed a thread there. I'm going to bring it back, line that up, and I'll be able to get 2 more, because this is on the fold. So I've got 2 of them here, and I'm going to have 2 here. Again, it's lined up. I'm using the ruler, the lines on the ruler, to make sure that everything is even on the edges. This is 5 inches square, as you can see there. And there we go. So we now have some 5-inch charm squares that we can use for our quilt. Now let's do the same and cut 3-inch squares, and I'm simply going to use the 3-inch line on my ruler. I'm going to make sure that it's lined up on the edge of that piece of fabric, which I already squared up. I'm making sure that this line is on that fold and everything looks perfectly even, and then I'm going to cut the 3-inch. Have an issue here with my, make sure you always have a sharp blade in. I thought this was a sharp blade, but I'm having an issue with it. All right, now I'm going to flip it over. First of all, I want to square up this side. You'll notice that I square up on the right, and then I cut when I flip it back. So I want to get rid of this here and make sure that it's squared up. Again, I'm lining up everything on those lines, getting rid of the excess. Now it is squared up, so now I can cut 3-inch squares from this. And here we go. There I'm lining up all of the edges of the fabric with the marks on the ruler. That's a 3-inch square. And I could cut as many as I needed. I can just keep on cutting across here. And I have this one piece left. Let's see what size it ends up being. Well, looky there, we get one more 3-inch square out of it. So that's how you cut the 3-inch squares and the 5-inch charms from a fat quarter. Now let's do the same using yardage. We'll move all of this out of the way. I do want to mention, here is some purple fabric. It's very bright and very bold. Whenever I purchase fabric or receive fabric from people that's either a deep purple, reds, deep blues, and a deep green, I will pre-wash those fabrics because those colors will often bleed. And when you pre-wash, you can either serge the raw edges if you want so that it doesn't fray as you're going through the wash and the dry cycle, or you can simply just cut across the corner on all of the corners, and that does help to prevent a lot of the fraying as well. But I do pre-wash fabrics that are purples, reds, dark blues, and dark greens because they do have a tendency to bleed, and you don't want to finish a quilt only to find that it's going to bleed. That isn't fun. There's a lot of work that goes into a quilt. So the first thing I want to do with yardage, and as you can see there's a whole lot of fabric here, it's going to hang on off the edge of my table. I have folded it in half lengthwise. So the selvage is over here, here is the fold, and now I'm going to fold it upon itself again and line it up on the line there. Then I am going to square it up on this side, again using that same 12-inch ruler by 6. It's a very handy ruler. I'm lining it up across the top, down here, and on the side. And there's 4 layers of fabric that you're cutting through, but that helps to square everything up beautifully on the side here. Now I'm going to flip it around, and I'm literally going to cut a 5-inch strip from this side. So let's get my ruler again. I'm lining it up on the top, bottom, and side here, making sure that everything is squared up in there. And cutting, I'm going to go one more time just in case I missed. Yep, I did. Definitely need a new blade. All right, so here is a 5-inch strip cut from 44-inch wide width of fabric. There it is. So before I subcut 5-inch squares from this, I'm going to make sure that this edge here is squared up. So I'm lining up the line on the ruler with the fabric and down here as well. And we'll get this edge squared up. Now I will flip it over and start subcutting that piece of fabric into 5-inch squares. And again, I'm just lining up these lines all the way around, making sure that it's perfectly even. And then I'm subcutting this 5-inch strip into 5-inch squares. And that is how you can create all that you need for the quilt. You may want to create the quilt in just a few colors, or you may have a lot of different fabrics that you'd like to use to create a variety, a very scrappy quilt. Now this is what I have left over. It is 5 inches wide, but it does happen to be 3 inches. So I can line up my ruler on here, and I can actually get a 3-inch square out of that. So I do have one 3-inch square. I have 8 5-inch squares. And what do I have left here? Looks like it's not quite 2. I could cut a 1.5-inch square out of that and put it in my scrap stash. Actually, I could cut 2 1.5-inch squares from this and put it in my scrap stash. And then all that's left is this. So this is what I was able to obtain from that 5-inch width of fabric strip. So I realized as I was cutting the purple fabric from the width of fabric strip, I had some of it off screen. You weren't able to see it as easily as you should have been able to. So I am going to try and get this centered so that it's something that you can actually see on the screen there. I want it in the middle of the screen, and I'm going to go ahead and get this squared up on the side. And again, what I'm doing is making sure that this line here is lined up at the top and at the bottom. And I am going to square up the side here. So that now the side of this fabric is squared up. I'm going to flip it around, and now I'm able to actually cut a 5-inch width of fabric strip from this. And again, what I want to do is take my ruler and line it up so that the line runs across here evenly and down the side evenly and across the bottom. And as long as all of those lines line it up beautifully, then we know that it is square. So then I can cut my width of fabric strip. So this again is going to be another 44-inch wide width of fabric strip. And another thing I do want to mention, when you're cutting fabric, always be sure to remove selvedge. Selvedge is the area here on the edge of the lengthwise edge of all fabric. It often has holes in it, and this is where the fabric was woven on the loom. So these are holes from the looms when they were weaving the fabric. This is much tighter. The woven fabrics that are here in the selvedges are much tighter, so they must be removed from the fabric before you use it in a quilt. So always just remove that. Some people like to actually use the selvedges and create fun things, so maybe that's something you might decide to do. I typically just toss it. It is not something that I use or that I keep. Okay, I've squared up the side. Now we are going to cut 5-inch strips from this pink fabric. And again, I'm just lining up the line across all 3 edges here to make sure that that strip is perfectly squared up. There we have some 5-inch squares. We should end up possibly with 8 again. Yes, it looks like we will end up with 8. And we don't really have any excess. Looks like this might be 1.5 inches, possibly. Actually, it is. So yes, I'm going to fold this over on itself. I'm going to cut some 1.5 inch squares because I will put this in my scrap stash in my 1.5 inch bin. And I'll talk to you more about that, how I sort and organize all of my scrap stash in another video. Alright, so what I've done here now is I've got some pinks, some blues, and some purples, which are all 5-inch squares, and I do have a few of the 3-inch squares cut, and we also got some 1.5-inch squares cut. So hopefully this video has helped answer questions for you on how to cut 5-inch squares and 3-inch squares, and even today we cut some 1.5-inch squares. And we cut these from fat quarters as well as yardage. If you have any other questions or want to see other videos, please include that information in the comment section. I love to read what my subscribers share with me, and if they have additional things that they'd like to learn about, I love to be able to share that information as well. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel, Quilting with Lori. Again, I am Lori Dickman. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a great quilting day.